The city square was full of energy as people gathered under a wide, gray morning sky. Signs rose above the crowd on wooden sticks, each one carrying a message of hope, pride, or demand for change. Voices joined together in a steady hum that built into a roar. Marissa Blake stood at the edge of this sea of color and sound. She wore a simple gray coat over her dress, and her dark hair was pulled back neatly. She held a small leather notebook in one hand and a pen in the other. Her calm face showed she was watching everything with care. She had come not as a speaker or protester, but as an observer who valued every person's right to be heard. Nearby, Officer Daniels sat high upon his strong gray horse. The creature's muscles moved smoothly beneath its thick coat as it carried him through the milling crowd. The horse's ears twitched at every shout, and its large eyes took in the shifting patterns of people. Daniels wore a dark blue uniform that shone with polished buttons. On his chest, his badge caught the light now and then, a reminder of his duty to protect and serve. He had ridden in 100 parades and festivals, but this was his first time on duty at a protest. He breathed deeply, trying to stay steady as the horse nudged forward with him. Marissa watched the mounted officers pass by. She admired their skill in guiding their animals while keeping balance. She knew that patrolling from horseback could help officers see over crowds and move quickly. She had studied the law for many years and often thought about the balance between authority and freedom. She saw that balance play out in real life. Children on their parents' shoulders waved tiny flags. Old friends met by chance and clasped hands. Strangers shared water bottles and sympathy when the air felt too hot. In each small moment, Marissa saw strength in people's unity. As the protest moved toward the center of the square, a sudden shout broke the hum of voices. A young man threw an empty water bottle into the air. It flew in an arc and landed with a sharp tap against the pavement near the mounted line. The bottle bounced harmlessly, but the sound made the horses jump. One of the officers frowned and called out to his horse. Daniels felt his own mount tense beneath him. He knew any sudden move could lead to trouble. He leaned forward with a firm voice, urging the horse to stay calm. Yet the many moving legs and waving arms made the animal uneasy. Marissa stepped back as she saw the horse rear its head slightly. She raised her hand, trying to calm the crowd. But the noise was too loud. A wave of feet seemed to carry the riders forward. In that moment, Daniels saw only a mass of bodies in the back of the horse in front of him. He did not see Marissa's silver hairpin or the lined leather notebook. In her hand, he did not see the gentle way she had offered water to an elderly woman only minutes before. He saw an opening and urged his mount to move ahead, believing he would simply clear space for other officers. The horse's heavy hoof hit the stone, ground, and then landed too close to Marissa's foot. The impact sent a shock through her body. She tried to lift her leg, but she felt sharp pain before darkness clouded her vision for a moment. She stumbled backward, her coat brushing the dusty ground. The protest's chorus turned to gasps as people saw her fall. Some called out in alarm. Others rushed forward with outstretched hands. Daniel's horse skidded to a stop, sensing the rider's panic. Daniels tugged gently on the reins, coaxing the animal back, and jumped down, heart pounding. For a few heartbeats, no one moved. Then a small group surrounded Marissa. One young woman knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. A man offered his jacket as a cushion under her head. Someone else called for medical help. Marissa lay still, her pen and notebook sliding away from her hand. She thought of her court back home, of the papers she had left on her desk, and of the many cases waiting for her careful notes. She felt a rush of frustration and fear. Stand and speak, to remind everyone that she was no threat. But the pain anchored her to the ground. Daniels pushed through the crowd with the help of another officer. His face was pale beneath his helmet. He knelt beside Marissa and asked if she could hear him. She blinked and tried to focus. Her voice came in a whisper, "I'm a judge." The words made him pause. He glanced at her coat pocket and saw a small leather holder. Inside was a badge he recognized, the seal of the Federal District Court. His stomach tightened. He reached for his radio and spoke quickly but softly, calling for the supervisor on duty. Within minutes, uniformed officers formed a circle around. The scene, creating a clear space. A small ambulance team arrived and began to examine Marissa's leg. She squeezed her eyes shut against the pain but managed a small nod when they asked if she was all right. Daniels stood by, guilt heavy in his chest. He whispered an apology she barely heard over the clicking of the paramedics' instruments. Her calm face did not show anger. Instead, it showed a steady determination, as if she were already thinking of what should come next. As the ambulance doors closed, Daniels watched it drive away. He felt each step he had taken as an officer, each decision to follow orders, and now the weight of one moment that changed everything. He thought of the thousands of words spoken in courtrooms across the country about fairness and justice. He felt the sudden gap between the ideals of law and the real work of enforcing it. Around him, protesters let out a collective sigh. Some comforted each other, while others watched in shock. The ripple of an unplanned event expanded across the gathering, reminding everyone how fragile peace could be. Marissa Blake's day had begun like any other. She had dressed carefully, chosen her coat for its pockets, packed her notebook, and walked into the crowd with respect and curiosity. She believed in the power of listening. She believed in the dignity of every person's voice. She was on a stretcher, ready to head to the hospital, but still clear in her mind about what she had seen. The protest was a living example of democracy in motion. She planned to write about what she had witnessed. She wondered how many would read her words, how many would remember the moment when law and heart met in a busy square. As the ambulance pulled away, Daniel stayed behind with his horse, patting its neck as if seeking comfort from the gentle creature. The square began to return to structure. Officers guided protesters back onto the sidewalks. Marshals checked for further injuries. The day's planned speeches were postponed. Yet in the hush that followed, a new conversation began about respect, about recognition, and about the care needed whenever authority steps into the space of public voice. In that pause between one breath and the next, everyone in the square felt the weight of what had happened and the promise of what could come after. The square felt alive with sound and motion. A steady hum of voices rose and fell like waves. Marissa Blake stood at the edge of the crowd, her eyes moving from one group of faces to the next, watched a circle of friends laughing with relief. When an older woman handed out cold bottles of water, she noticed a man kneeling beside a child, tying a shoelace that had come untied in the shuffle. Everywhere, she saw ordinary acts of kindness mixed with a rumble of strong emotion. Officer Daniels sat tall on his horse, feeling the animal's breath in the morning air. The horse's flanks swelled and relaxed with each step. Daniels listened for any sign of trouble, scanning the banners and the placards for words that might spark anger. He saw messages of unity, calls for justice, and personal stories written in bright colors. He believed that most people had come peacefully, but he also knew that one small spark could set off a larger reaction. Suddenly, a sharp sound broke through the gentle roar. A plastic water bottle spun in the air, its cap popping off as it flew. Marissa watched it arc toward the mounted officers. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew that even something as harmless as a bottle could frighten a horse. The bottle landed near the horse at the front of the line, skittering on the stone without, spilling a drop. The sudden noise made the horse's ears flick back, and its head shot up. Daniels felt the horse tense beneath him. He spoke softly, "Easy, girl." But the animal's muscles stayed tight. He glanced around, trying to see who had thrown the bottle. People scattered in every direction, some ducking behind friends, others stepping back in surprise. His view was blocked by a young man holding a sign aloft with one hand and clutching his cap in the other. The man's face was full of fear, not anger. He looked as startled as the horse itself. Marissa moved instinctively to give the horse room. Stepped to the side, lifting one foot to avoid the animal's hoof. Yet the space she chose was just a hair too close. She nearly touched the horse's flank when it jolted forward. In that instant, Daniels urged the animal on, trying to move it out of the sudden danger zone. Thought he was guiding it through a gap in the crowd. He did not yet see Marissa's gray coat or her notebook lying open in her hand. As the horse moved, the crowd shifted. Some people backed away in fear. Others reached out, as if to calm the animal. A small child cried out, drawing protective arms from a nearby adult. The noise rose. words of alarm mixed with calls for calm. Someone shouted, "Hold on." Another voice said, "Stop pushing." The energy in the square rose, turning uneasy. Daniels felt the reins press into his hands. He gave a firm pull, hoping to slow the horse. But the horse's legs were already in motion, carrying him forward. A sudden surge of bodies parted around him. He kept his balance as the animal's stride lengthened. He saw movement at the edge of his vision, a flash of gray. He realized too late that someone was in the horse's path. Marissa felt the ground move beneath her feet just before the hoof connected. Time seemed to slow. She heard the soft rustle of her coat and the thud of heavy leather boots against stone. The pain came quick and sharp like a sudden crack. Stumbled backward, her pen falling from her fingers. Her notebook slipped from her other hand, pages flapping in the breeze. She tried to steady herself, but her knee bent in the wrong direction. A gasp rose from the crowd. Hands reached for her. A young woman with a white scarf knelt beside her and gently lifted her chin. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice calm, but urgent. Marissa tried to speak, but only a whisper emerged. "Help, please." "Oh, please." The words were soft, but someone called out for first aid. Daniels guided his horse to a stop, drawing a deep breath he did not realize he was holding. He slid down from the saddle, his boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. He saw Marissa on the pavement, her face pale but collected. He recognized her now, the neat way she held herself, the professional calm in her brown eyes, even in pain. She wore a small badge clipped to her coat pocket. He stepped forward, trembling. "I'm so sorry," Daniel said, voice thick. "I didn't see you." He knelt beside her, reaching out but hesitating to touch her. The young woman moved aside, letting him place a hand gently on Marissa's arm. She winced but did not pull away. "It was the bottle," she whispered. "It frightened your horse." Daniels's shoulders heaved with guilt. I should have been more careful," he said. "I should have seen you." He glanced at his horse, now standing quietly. With ears pricked, the animal's eyes seemed to ask what had happened. Daniels patted the horse's neck. "We're all right, girl." Then he turned his attention back to Marissa. A crowd gathered in a cautious circle, giving the two space. Some people stood with hands clasped. Others looked away, unwilling to watch. A man in a bright jacket knelt down to check Marissa's leg. "Can you wiggle your toes?" he asked. She tried. A dull ache filled her lower leg, but she could move her foot. He smiled, relief in his expression. "You'll be okay. Just need some rest." Marissa nodded. She wanted to speak, to tell everyone she was fine, that she was a judge who believed in peaceful protest, but the words stuck in her throat. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slowly. She thought of her courtroom, where calm voices ruled and every person had a chance to speak. Here in the open square, voices rose and fell in waves. Sometimes the loudest ones were full of anger, sometimes full of hope. Daniels called into his radio, voice low, "We have an injury. Need medics at the south end of the square." Within moments, 2 paramedics arrived, carrying a small kit and a folding stretcher. They knelt and spoke kindly to Marissa, asking her name and where it hurt most. She told them, Marissa Blake, and felt a small surge of pride. This was not how she had planned her day, but she would face it with the same strength she brought to her court sessions. The paramedics prepared the stretcher. They placed a soft triangle bandage under her knee and gently lifted her onto the board. Marissa held her breath as they slid it beneath her and folded her legs straight. She looked up at Daniels, was bowed, and his shoulders shook slightly. She managed a small smile. "It's okay," she said quietly. "Just be careful next time." Daniels's eyes widened at her forgiveness. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. He held up the leather, reins to keep his horse calm, while others cleared a path. Marissa gripped the edge of the stretcher with her good hand and offered another nod. The paramedics lifted and carried her toward the ambulance waiting nearby. As she passed the crowd, Marissa saw faces she had never met, but that now held respect. In their eyes, a few bowed their heads. Some reached out, offering quiet words of support. She heard, "Thank you for being here," and we hope you heal soon." She felt warmth spread through her despite the pain. Once inside the ambulance, the doors closed with a soft sigh. The vehicle's engine started, and it rolled slowly toward the city hospital. Marissa laid back on the cot, her notebook beside her. She reached for it, tracing its leather cover with a finger. She thought of all the pages she had filled with legal arguments and notes on human dignity. Now, she was writing a new story, one of a moment when protest, justice, and compassion met in the middle of a city square. Officer Daniels watched as the ambulance turned the corner. He held his horse's reins loosely, staring after the vehicle. Like it carried his own heart, thought of the balance between security and respect of his duty to protect both people and their right to speak. He vowed to learn from this mistake, to check twice, 3 times, before urging his horse forward. Again. Behind him, the protest began to settle. Marshals guided the crowd back to the sidewalks. Speakers found new spots to stand and continued their messages of change. The rhythm of chanting rose again, softer now, careful around the memory of what had happened. Life in the square went on. Marissa Blake closed her eyes for a moment and felt the ambulance sway. She allowed herself to rest, knowing that after the pain came healing, and after the chaos came reflection. She thought of the people still in the square, raising their voices for a better world. She thought of the officers, trying their best to keep order. In her mind, she wove these strands together, ready to write a report that would help both sides learn and grow. The small skirmish had shown how quickly fear could spread, how easily a protest could shift from calm to crisis. But it had also shown how kindness could shine through. Hands had reached out to help a fallen woman. A judge had forgiven an officer. A crowd had respected a life in pain. In those moments, Marissa saw the true power of community. And she knew that tomorrow, her words would carry this story far beyond the square, reminding everyone that in every protest lies a chance for understanding, and in every misstep, a chance for grace. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and quiet hope. Marissa Blake lay on a narrow bed, her leg wrapped in a soft brace that held it steady. Sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds, marking stripes on the pale green walls. She blinked. As a nurse adjusted her pillow and offered a small cup of water, each sip burned her throat, but she welcomed the taste of something cool. Her mind drifted back to the square, to the moment when the hoof had struck her. She remembered the sharp crack of bone and the sudden rush of pain that had blurred her vision. She remembered the kindness of strangers' hands that had lifted her, voices that had called for help. Now, in this calm room, she felt the slow pull of reality. She was safe, but she had work to do. A soft knock came at the door. By rights. She should have waited for the doctor's permission, but she felt strong enough to face whoever stood outside. "Come in," she said, her voice steady. Officer Daniels entered, dressed in his uniform with polished boots and a dark cap in his hand. His face was lined with worry and regret. He paused at the bedside, unsure whether to approach. "Judge Blake," he began, voice low. "I came to check on you." He cleared his throat. "I brought you this." He held out a small bouquet of white daisies, each one bright against the green hospital vase. "They're from the precinct." Marissa offered him a soft smile. She reached out and took the flowers, feeling their gentle petals between her fingers. "Thank you," she said. "They're lovely." She touched the brace on her leg. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me." Daniel shifted on his feet, guilt weighing his shoulders down. "I know," he said. "But I should have been more careful. I should have seen you." He sat in a chair by the bed, careful not to brush her. "When I saw your badge, I felt awful. I realized then who you were." Marissa nodded. She had not blamed him for the accident. She believed in fair chances. "It was an accident," she said, her tone gentle. "A protest can be a hard place for horses and people alike. I understand." She looked at him with clear brown eyes. "But we need better rules for everyone's safety." Daniels exhaled. "We'll get them," he promised. "I've already spoken to my superiors. They want to learn from this." He paused. "May I ask how you feel?" "Bit sore," Marissa admitted, shifting on the bed. But I'm more concerned about the bigger picture. How we can make sure this never happens again. She lay back and closed her eyes for a moment. I want to help. He nodded, relief flickering in his expression. Detective Morales will come by tomorrow. She's leading the internal review. She might have questions for you. He stood and placed his cap on the bedside table. I'll let her know you're awake. When Daniels left, Marissa thought of the square again. She had always known that being a judge meant more than sitting in a courtroom. It meant listening to people's stories, weighing right and wrong, and finding fair solutions. Now her own story would be part of a larger case about how law enforcement and citizens could stand together without harm. Later that afternoon, Detective Morales arrived. She was a tall woman with a serious face but gentle eyes. She introduced herself and took a seat opposite Marissa. She had a small notepad and pen, ready to record every word. Thank you for speaking with me, Judge Blake Morales said. I know this must be difficult. Marissa offered a polite nod. I'm happy to help. Morales opened her notebook. Can you tell me exactly what happened before the hoof struck you? Marissa took a breath and closed her eyes, reviewing. The moments there was a bottle thrown, she began. I stepped back to let the horse pass. It moved forward quickly, and the hoof hit my leg. She spoke slowly, choosing each word. I didn't hear a warning, and I was too close. I fell hard, and then people helped me. Morales wrote down every sentence. Did you see the person who threw the bottle? She asked. Marissa shook her head. No, it flew so fast. I only heard the pop of the cap. Did any officers warn the crowd before moving the horses? Marissa considered. I heard some talk of clearing space, but no clear announcements. She opened her eyes. If officers had called out to the crowd first, maybe everyone would have moved. Morales looked up. That's helpful. We'll review the mounted unit's communication protocols. She closed her notebook. One more thing. Did you recognize the officer who was on the horse that hit you? Marissa thought of Daniels. Yes. He apologized and stayed with me. I believe he did not intend to cause harm. Morales nodded. I'll note that. Thank you, Judge. You're doing great. As she rose and offered her hand. I'll be in touch. Rest well. After Morales left, Marissa felt tired. She hadn't eaten since morning. She opened the small tray on the rolling table and found a sandwich and an apple. She took small bites, savoring the taste and dreaming of returning to her cases. Each bite reminded her of the world outside this room, where people were still speaking their minds in that square. That evening, a reporter called her room. Marissa hesitated, but she believed in transparency. She allowed a brief interview. She spoke calmly, careful with her words. I thanked the officers who helped me. I hope this event leads to better safety measures. I support peaceful protest and believe that respect and preparation can protect everyone. Her short statement appeared in the news that night. On television, images of her in the square and then on the hospital bed played side by side. Viewers heard her voice, saw her calm face. Many applauded her empathy. Others debated the role of mounted patrols. Back in her room, Marissa watched the news for a moment. She felt proud of how she spoke. She turned off the television and closed, her eyes allowing herself to rest. The next morning, her phone rang early. It was her assistant at the courthouse. She learned that her trial schedule had been rearranged to allow her to heal. She felt gratitude for the small kindnesses that made her return easier. Later that day, city officials visited. The mayor came, with several aides. He brought a formal apology and a promise to review all protest safety protocols. He spoke of new training for officers and clearer signals before mounted units moved. Marissa listened and nodded. She took notes in her notebook, planning ideas she would share with the city council next week. When the mayor left, Daniels returned, this time in plain clothes. He carried a stack of books, some about crowd management, others about equine behavior. I thought you might find these useful, he said. Placing them gently on her bedside table, Marissa smiled as she examined the titles. Thank you. I'll read them. She opened one and flipped through pages about how horses perceive noise and movement. This will help me understand what happened. Daniels cleared his throat. I also wanted to give you this. He handed her a letter on official precinct letterhead. It was a medal nomination award for the officer who led the aid efforts after her fall. We want to honor the officers who turned a mistake into swift help. Marissa read the letter. She felt moved. She looked up at Daniels. It's very kind. He nodded. You showed us grace. We want to show you gratitude. A few days later, Marissa walked slowly down a quiet corridor toward physical therapy. Each step was measured, held steady by crutches. She paused by a window overlooking the city's skyline, watching cars and pedestrians below. She thought of the square once more, remembered the roar of voices. Now the roar felt gentler, like a hymn. Inside the therapy room, a soft-voiced therapist guided her through stretches and weight-bearing exercises. Marissa focused on each movement, determined to heal fully. She knew recovery would take weeks, but she felt hopeful. That afternoon, she received an unexpected email. It was from a community organizer who had been at the protest. The message thanked her for her fair words and offered to meet when she was ready. They spoke of forming a community panel to improve protest safety, one that included judges, officers, and citizens. Marissa's eyes lit up at the idea. She replied with enthusiasm. As the sun set on her third hospital day, Marissa sat by her bed, notebook on her lap. She wrote in clear, careful letters, Day 3, healing, reflection, and a chance to shape the future. Her meeting with the community panel, she thought of the square, the officers, the protesters, the children with flags. She saw them all as threads in a tapestry. Each one needed to be placed with care. In her journal, she wrote, I will use my voice to bridge gaps. I will work with law enforcement to build trust. I will remind citizens that safety and freedom can walk hand in hand. She closed her notebook and looked at the medal nomination still lying nearby. It was a symbol of gratitude, of the complex dance between action and reaction. Marissa settled onto the bed, the brace on her leg warm and snug. She let the day's lessons settle in her mind. She had been struck down by an accident, but she would rise with new purpose. She would stand not only in courtrooms, but in community halls and city meetings, carrying the story of that day. Or she would remind everyone that even a misstep can become a step forward if guided by respect, care, and the simple act of listening. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the police precinct as Detective Morales and Internal Affairs Captain Reed gathered in a small conference room. The air was quiet but charged with purpose. Red laid out a thick folder on the table. Inside were reports from the mounted unit, witness statements, and notes from the medical team. Morales flipped through pages, reading aloud sections that described how Officer Daniel's horse had struck Judge Marissa Blake at the protest. The words felt heavy in the room. Reed looked up and said, We need a full review of the protocols used that day. Morales nodded and added, And we must interview every officer on duty. Outside the conference room, news of the inquiry spread quickly through the precinct. Officers whispered in hallways, trading worried looks. Some felt the pressure of public eyes, watching their every move. Others remembered how calm things had been under Captain Reed's leadership before the incident. Sergeant Alvarez, who had served for 15 years, gathered a small group and reminded them that the department's duty was to learn and improve. He spoke quietly but firmly. We all make mistakes. What matters now is how we respond. His words offered comfort to his colleagues. Meanwhile, community leaders convened in a nearby church hall. Banners for justice and safety hung on the walls, and a long wooden table held bottles of water and light snacks. Reverend Carter, a respected voice in the city, opened the meeting. He thanked everyone for coming and acknowledged Judge Blake's courage in sharing her experience. To him sat Ms. Davis, a civil rights advocate, and Mr. Patel, who ran a neighborhood youth program. Each spoke of the need for clear guidelines that honored both free speech and public safety. Ms. Davis said softly, We want to protect our voices, but we also want to protect one another. As the week progressed, Captain Reed scheduled a meeting with Judge Blake at the courthouse. In her private chambers, Marissa sat behind her desk. Her leg rested on a soft cushion beside her. The room smelled faintly of old leather and polished wood. She had recovered enough to walk with only a single cane. Reed and Daniels entered, wearing suits rather than uniforms. Reed began by expressing regret for how events had unfolded. "Judge Blake, thank you for meeting with us again," he said. "We want to hear your suggestions for going forward." Marissa smiled warmly at both men. She remembered the fear she had felt when she was knocked down, but she also remembered the kindness she had received. "I appreciate the chance to help," she said. She unfolded a stack of papers on her desk. These were her notes: ideas for mounted unit training, communication plans, and safety zones at large gatherings. She introduced the first suggestion: clear verbal warnings before horses move. If officers announce, clear the way for mounted. Patrol: people can make space calmly. Daniels nodded, taking careful notes. Next, Marissa described a second proposal: designated safety marshals. These marshals would wear bright vests and stand at key points during protests. Their job would be to guide crowd flow and relay information between protest leaders and police. She explained how this had worked in other cities she had studied. "With marshals in place, both sides can hear each other," she said. Reed looked impressed by the practical detail of her proposal. He tapped his pen thoughtfully. Marissa then spoke of joint training sessions. She envisioned gatherings where officers, judges, and community members could learn from each other. One day could be spent discussing protest rights and another on horse behavior. She believed this shared learning would build trust. Daniels raised his hand slightly. "I would welcome that chance," he said. "To learn more about how horses respond and how we can avoid scares." Marissa felt a spark of hope at his willingness. Over the next days, the department moved to implement these ideas. Posters appeared in the stables, reminding riders to use clear voice commands. Bright orange vests were ordered for the new marshals, and a pilot group of volunteers from community organizations signed up to help. Training schedules were drawn up that included outdoor drills at a quiet park area. Judges and officers would practice together, simulating peaceful demonstrations and learning to talk calmly to one another. City council members also took note. In a public meeting, the mayor announced that the police department would adopt Marissa's safety proposals. He spoke of unity and change, praising the judge's dedication to justice on and off the bench. Community leaders applauded, holding up signs that read, "Safety through respect." Protest organizers agreed to coordinate future events with the new marshal teams. The city felt a renewed sense of purpose, as if a gap had been bridged by a single moment of understanding. Weeks passed, and one cool morning, Judge Blake returned to her courtroom. She walked in with a slight limp, but a confident stride. The bailiff stood respectfully as she took her seat. People who had followed her story watched from the gallery, curious to see how she would preside. She opened her casebook and began her day's hearings. Despite her recent injury, her voice sounded clear and steady. In each ruling, she spoke of fairness, tempering the harshness of law with gentle reminders of compassion. Court clerks noted how she paused to ensure every person understood their rights and responsibilities. Meanwhile, in a stable behind the police station, Officer Daniels tended to his horse, Luna. He brushed her coat and spoke softly. "We've learned a lot, girl," he murmured. He attached a small speaker to her saddle that would broadcast his voice when he guided her through crowds. He practiced calling out the new warning phrases, hearing his voice echo in the open barn. As Luna responded calmly, he smiled. Together, they were ready for a new chapter. Marissa's influence reached beyond protests and courts. She began writing opinion pieces in the city daily newspaper. In simple, clear language, she outlined the lessons learned from her accident. Listen before acting, speak clearly when leading, and respect the space people need. Readers wrote letters thanking her for making law more human. An editorial praised her as someone who turned personal pain into community progress. One afternoon, Detective Morales called to invite Marissa and Officer Daniels to a panel discussion at the city university. They agreed. On the day of the event, students filled the auditorium. Daniels spoke first, recounting his view from horseback and the lessons he had learned about caution and care. Then Marissa shared her story, describing her role as judge and citizen in the public square. She spoke of accidents that can teach us if we remain open to change. The audience listened in respectful silence. After the discussion, people lined up to shake their hands. A young activist thanked Marissa for valuing protest rights and safety equally. A police recruit told Daniels how inspired he felt by the changes. The two men stood side by side, nodding to each new voice. In that moment, they represented a community that had found a way forward. Back at home that evening, Marissa sat by her window, notebook in hand. She wrote a final entry about part 4 of her journey, how an inquiry had become an opportunity, how words and actions could heal wounds, and how cooperation could build trust. She thought of each person involved, the officers, the volunteers, the community leaders. She felt gratitude for their openness and courage as she closed her notebook. Marissa looked out at the city lights twinkling below. She thought of the square where her story had begun and of the path that had led her here. She knew that peace was not a place but an effort, one made by many hands, guided by respect and shared purpose. With that thought, she turned off her lamp and rested, ready for whatever came next. Soft light filtered through the curtains as Marissa Blake woke in her own bed for the first time in weeks. Her legs still felt tender, and the brace hugged it gently. She stretched and reached over to her nightstand, where her notebook lay. Turning its pages, she saw her sketches and notes about safety marshals, clear voice commands, and joint training. A small smile touched her lips. Those notes had become plans, and those plans were already changing her city. Today she would take one more step forward. Downstairs, she found her husband making tea in the kitchen. He placed a warm cup beside her and helped her settle in the armchair by the window. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. "Ready?" he asked softly. Marissa nodded, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. Outside, the morning sun shone on the neighbors' homes, and birds sang as if celebrating her return. She sipped her tea, ready to begin her day with a new kind of purpose. Her first stop was the community center, where the safety marshals had gathered the previous week. Volunteers formed a group of men and women in bright orange vests, each one eager to learn more. Marissa stood before them, leaning on her cane, but standing tall. She spoke about empathy and caution. "Your job is to help people feel seen and safe," she told them. Their faces lit up with pride. They asked questions about crowd flow, about responding to emergencies, about how to guide horses if needed. Marissa answered each question clearly, knowing that their work could prevent another accident. After the community center, she moved on to the police stables. The air smelled of hay and leather. Officer Daniels met her at the fence, Luna the horse standing quietly behind him. Daniels had spent extra time practicing the new voice commands with Luna, and he wanted Marissa to see. He climbed onto Luna's back with a confident grace, raised his hand, spoke firmly into the speaker attached to the saddle. "Please, clear the way for mounted patrol." Luna stepped forward slowly, allowing space to open in the small training arena. Spectators watching from the sidelines nodded in approval. Marissa felt a rush of happiness. She saw trust growing between officer and citizen, horse and human. Next, she visited the courthouse library, where she led a workshop for young law students on community justice. The room was filled with eager faces, pens poised above notebooks. Marissa told her story, how an unexpected accident had taught her that justice was more than words on paper. She spoke of listening to each side, of valuing safety and free speech equally. Students asked how they could help in their future roles. She encouraged them to volunteer as safety marshals or to attend joint training sessions with officers. She explained that change began with small steps and open hearts. Late afternoon found her at City Hall, where the mayor had invited her to join a new advisory council. The room buzzed with conversation as community leaders, police representatives, and elected officials assembled around a long table. Marissa sat between Reverend Carter and Chief Hernandez of the police department. The mayor thanked her for her leadership and asked for her input on a public safety budget. Marissa suggested allocating funds for more equine training equipment and for public workshops on protest rights. She spoke with calm conviction, and the room fell silent in respect. When she finished, applause filled the chamber. On her way home, Marissa stopped by the square where the protest had taken place. It was quiet now, just a wide open space framed by trees and benches. She remembered the banners, the chants, the moment of fear, and then the kindness. But she placed a hand on a low stone wall and breathed deeply. In her mind, she saw images of people holding hands, horses moving slowly, voices echoing respectful warnings. The square held memories of conflict and of healing. She left a single white daisy on the wall as a symbol of peace. That evening, her friends gathered at her house for a small dinner. They brought casseroles and salads, laughter echoing through the living room. Marissa sat in her favorite chair and shared stories of her busy day. They cheered when she spoke of the first successful safety drill, and they nodded thoughtfully when she described the council meeting. Between bites of pie, they praised her for turning pain into progress. Marissa felt warm gratitude. She realized that her community now stood stronger because they had learned to listen and to work together. Before bed, she opened her notebook. Once more, she wrote a final entry for this chapter of her life, Day 30, from accident to action, from fear to fellowship. She drew a simple map of the square, marking safe zones and marshal stations. She sketched Luna and Daniels practicing their voice commands. She jotted down dates for upcoming workshops. As she wrote, she felt a steady calm wash over her. Her leg had healed enough for her to walk unaided, and her spirit felt lighter than when it had in months. In the days that followed, Marissa continued her work with unwavering dedication. She attended a press conference where the mayor announced a citywide initiative called Safe Voices. Billboards reminded citizens of protest rights and safety tips. City buses carried messages urging respect for mounted units. Schools included lessons on peaceful assembly in their civics classes. Everywhere she looked, she saw signs of change. And behind each sign stood the efforts of many volunteers, officers, teachers, and students bound by a common goal of safety and respect. One morning, she received a letter from a group of children who had visited the courthouse. They had drawn pictures of horses with bright flags and judges smiling beside officers. Their teacher wrote that the children learned how law and community could help one another. Marissa placed the drawings on her office wall, where she could see them every day. Their simple innocence reminded her why she had chosen this path: to protect and to empower for the sake of future generations. Months later, during a calm but spirited protest in the square, Marissa stood among the crowd, not as a judge, but as a member of the community. She wore no robe, only a light coat, and a badge identifying her as an observer. She watched as safety marshals guided people gently, as mounted officers moved slowly with clear voice commands, and as protesters raised their signs with confidence. The energy was strong yet peaceful, voices rising in unison without any hint of chaos. Marissa felt a deep sense of pride and relief. After the protest, she walked to the stone wall where she had left the daisy. There she saw other flowers' notes of gratitude, small drawings, and messages of unity. Someone had placed a sign that read, "Thank you, Judge Blake." Tears filled her eyes. She knelt and whispered, "This is why we stand together." She stood and gazed at the square, knowing that the change she helped spark would live on long after her time on the bench. That night, back at home, she sat with her husband on the porch. The air was cool, and fireflies blinked among the trees. She rested her head on his shoulder and reflected on her journey. She thought of the pain, the inquiry, the meetings, and the triumphs. She realized that the weakest moment of her life had led to the strongest change in her community. She closed her eyes and let the quiet night wrap around her like a gentle promise. Marissa Blake knew that roads of justice were not always straight or smooth. They could twist through unexpected places and bring hard lessons. But she also knew that every step taken with listening, respect, and courage could lead to a safer, kinder path for all. With that thought, she rose and went inside, ready to dream of new ways to protect freedom and to foster peace, knowing that the story of Part 5 was just the beginning of a brighter future.